Hello, everyone. I wanted to do a short video on um, just some things to think about when we talk about exegesis and when we think about our work as readers of the biblical text and as interpreters, as faith leaders, and um, yeah, some different ways of thinking about that might challenge more traditional notions um, of reading and extracting meaning and that sort of extracting a correct meaning, I should say. So I want to introduce some of those ideas, and then I also want to just go over in a bit more detail what my expectations are for your exegetical worksheets. Um, so this shouldn't be too long. Let's begin. So in the 1970s, in the 1960s to 1970s, there was something that happened in the world of history, philosophy, and hermeneutics called the literary turn. And what that means is that there was a focus on the subjective nature of reading, the subjective nature of history and philosophy, and the different ways that those things are created and understood, not so much from a standpoint of pure empirical fact or um, a stance of you know being completely correct, but acknowledging that there's a subjective role of each reader, of each historian, of each philosopher in the work that they are doing. And in biblical studies, this had a huge impact on the field, where um, you go from a discipline that's largely dominated by white male European and North American scholars approaching the text from a historical standpoint and really like approaching it as if they are writing history, they are showing you the meaning of the text, to opening up the field to voices that have been marginalized. This is when you have the advent and the entrance of feminism into biblical studies. It's when you have Black liberation theology and readings of the Bible emerge. In the 80s, you start to see gay and lesbian readings, and you can advance up to our time, the last decade or so, where you have queer readings of scripture, where you have Black women doing their own work, which we'll look at here in a second. But one of the early contributors to this literary turn that blew open the field of biblical studies, of hermeneutics, of history in general, was Wolfgang Iser. And he wrote a book called The Act of Reading, A Theory of Aesthetic Response. And his basic premise was that in reading a text, you have two poles. You have a reader and you have a text. And these things are two discrete things until they start to interact with one another. And what I mean by that is the reader reading a text and having an experience with a text where such that meaning emerges through this experience. So I want to share, and this challenged the ideas that an author writes a text and encodes the meaning of the text into the words on the page, and that it's up to us, the readers, to find that meaning almost like a treasure hunt. You look at the text to extract the meaning that the author hid there. And I would imagine that a lot of us still think in that framework a lot of our congregations and people who read the Bible still think in that framework of there's a meaning hidden here. We need to find it. The problem with that is look at the volume of commentaries on any given book of the Bible. I just taught a class on the Song of Songs last semester, and Song of Songs has more historical, like early Jewish and early Christian and medieval Jewish and medieval Christian commentaries than any other biblical book. But every book has commentaries upon commentaries, and they're all different. Sure, they draw on each other, but there are differences. If the idea that there's one singular meaning that can be extracted from a text, if that is true, the evidence has not borne that out. And so reading is less about finding a hidden meaning than it is about experiencing a text and creating meaning in that process. So a couple quotes from Iser. Far more instructive than teaching meaning will be an analysis of what actually happens when one is reading a text. For that is when the text begins to unfold its potential. It is in the reader that the text comes to life, and this is true even when the meaning has become so historical that it is no longer relevant to us. In reading, we are able to experience things that no longer exist and to understand things that are totally unfamiliar to us. And this could be extended to not just understanding or experiencing things that no longer exist, but opening up new avenues, opening up completely new meanings that haven't been explored yet. So this act of reading, something special happens in this interaction between text and reader, rather than just you dive in, you find the meaning, and you're done. You can go back again and again and have different experiences with the text. Iser calls this the aesthetic effect, right? Enjoying a text and enjoying that experience of creating meaning. So the aesthetic effect is in the nature of an experience and not an exercise in explanation. Thus, the meaning of a literary text is not a definable entity, but if anything, a dynamic happening. What does this mean for us as interpreters? The interpreter's task is to elucidate the potential meanings, plural, the potential meanings of a text. So we aren't looking for the hidden meaning or the correct interpretation. We are focused on interacting with a text, experiencing the text in such a way that meaning emerges from that interface, just as it has done for readers in all times and all places. As interpreters, as pastors, as religious professionals, as graduate religion students, we want to use our knowledge and the things that we know about a text. We want to use that to open up the potentialities for meaning, to lead readers, other readers into this experience, not to bludgeon a meaning over their head. Well, here it is, swallow it. No, we lead them into this experience, and we can do that in community. Renita Weems was one of the early womanist scholars. And what I mean by womanist is that she's an African-American woman who's doing theology from her perspective as an African-American woman. Womanist scholars kind of take two different fields of studies and merge them. So as Black Americans, they found that the male-dominated African American tradition didn't quite speak for them. Their experience didn't quite match the Black man's experience in the same way that their experience as a woman didn't line up with feminism that was dominated by white women. And so you get a totally different kind of approach to a text. And the field of womanist studies is vibrant now, and there's a lot of work being done in that area. And I usually have all of my students read an article by Renita Weems called "Rereading for Liberation: African American Women in the Bible," because it was such a transformative work for me when I was a seminarian, reading her work. And I just want to share a few things a few quotes from that chapter. Again, her as a womanist scholar, her lens is liberation. How do we read a text in a way that contributes to a liberative framework? So here are a couple quotes from her. A womanist hermeneutics of liberation shares with feminist hermeneutics of liberation the goal of changing consciousness and transforming reality. But the main point of our work as womanist scholars is to empower African American women as readers, as agents, and as shapers of discourse by uncovering the program and agenda of both biblical texts and dominant cultural readings. So in this case, specifically, how do African American women break into a field, into a repertoire of interpretations that have been produced by white men, in a way that liberates the text and that liberates the reader from those readings. And not to say that those are incorrect readings. That's not what we're after here. But a meaning cannot be imposed on all people. A text isn't going to mean the same thing for every single person. We might come to an agreement, especially as a class, we might come to an agreement on what might be a better reading. But to say that I'm going to tell you, your instructor, I'm going to tell you what this text means, and you take it. That's incorrect. That's not how I operate. That's not how I encourage students to operate. And so I really like this idea of challenging, dominant readings in a way that says, one size doesn't fit all. Real flesh and blood people with real vested interest were behind the production and transmission of the Bible's contents, and real flesh and blood readers are behind all modes of interpretations and readings with positions and agendas that prompt them to be more invested in one reading over another. Right? This is true. The point here clearly is to decenter for marginalized readers the privileged status of the dominant readings and the dominant community of readers. A womanist biblical hermeneutics takes as its starting point the fundamental notion that people have power, not texts. People have power, not texts. You, as readers, have power, not texts. Do not let a text have power over you. If someone says, the Bible says X, Y, Z, whatever they are saying, how are they using the power? First of all, I say, the Bible doesn't say anything. A book, I don't even have one sitting here. A book doesn't say anything. It's nothing. It means nothing. until you as a reader pick it up and do something with it. So the Bible doesn't say anything. You, as a reader, say something based on your interaction with that text. You have power, not the text. How are you going to use that power? Rereading for liberation is not done in a vacuum, nor is it a solitary enterprise. Liberation is the work of people reaching out to one another across the gulf of their real flesh and blood, painful gender, racial, national, religious, and geopolitical differences. And I think that goes on to say something to the extent of, and reading together in a way that fosters liberation. So people have power, not texts. Now, how do we, as informed and diligent readers, use that power? What are our aims and our goals in reading? Do our interpretations contribute to an ethic of justice and peace? Do they contribute to liberation? These are the things we need to ask ourselves as we're reading. Okay, for your exegetical worksheets, here's a brief overview of what I'm looking for. So the purpose of an exegetical exercise is to engage in a deeper reading of a passage in a way that pays attention to all of the variables of the text. It pays attention to the historical context, the literary context, the rhetorical context, and it pays attention to how the story is constructed, how does it flow, what are the key points, what's the main point of the passage, who are the speakers, those sorts of things. In this exercise that I'm asking you to do each week, I'm not asking you to, it's not a research exercise. I want you to start out by reading the passage with your study Bible, your Jewish annotated New Testament, or if you have a different study Bible, you can do that. But you read the notes, read the introduction to that particular book. So next week, you're going to be reading Mark. Read the introduction to the Gospel of Mark. And then look if you have your gospel parallels, look at that, and you can see if there are any cross references with other gospels. Okay, that's as much research as you need to do, in addition to listening to the lectures and doing the readings. Then you open up the document that I've posted on Moodle. That's just the plain text. You're going to read that. You read the passage again without any notes. Read it in isolation. Okay? Jot down your observations of the text's literary and rhetorical context, right? Where does it fit in the overall construction of the book? Where does it fit in the overall in that section of text? Yeah, it's not a piece in isolation. So contextualize it in its literary context and in its rhetorical context, how it's being used, who's doing the speaking. Is it the narrator? Are there characters who are doing the speaking? Is Jesus giving a sermon? What's the rhetorical context? Then you jot down anything you know about the text, social context and rhetorical situation, what's going on in the Greco-Roman world, in the Second Temple, Jewish world at that time, if you can know anything about it. So the world behind the text, right? Take a look at that. Then you can either mark up your exegetical worksheet, or you can use the formatting functions and the comment function in Word to make notes and to identify features in the text. In the text itself, underline and circle key words, connections, and maybe phrases. that might happen in other places in that gospel or in other books. Pay attention to indicators of structure, movement, and main points. What I mean by this is like, you know, for the reading next week in Mark, Jesus um, Jesus arrives in the Gerasenes, and then he does X, Y, Z, and then this happens and that happens. I don't have the text in front of me. That's all I'm looking for. A basic outline of what happens. Can you identify the flow of the passage? Can you identify the main point? What do you think the author's point in telling and presenting the story? What is the author's purpose in doing in structuring that story the way that they did? Then, yeah, in the margins or with your note function on Word, note the intratextual links, so links to other passages within the book, and intertextual links, passages to other writings in the Hebrew Bible, in the New Testament, or if there's a reference to a rabbinical work in your Jewish New Testament, you'll find that quite often. And then note definitions of words, right? If any of you read Greek and can use, Liddell Scott Jones lexicon or something, by all means, please engage the Greek. I would love to see that. Note definitions of words, key theological claims, anything relevant and significant learned from your reading, any questions you have also. There are no instances where you're going to be working with more than one text, so don't worry about that part here. Yeah, and the rest of it is pretty self-explanatory. Create a brief outline. Note the chief theological claims, and basically be prepared to discuss this in your reading groups later on in the week or whenever you agree to meet as a group. Look, there are 26 of you in this class, and I'm teaching 2 classes, and I also work a part-time job. So I'm not going to be spending a ton of time grading these. It's not a technical assignment. What I want to see is that you engage the text in a deep way, in an intentional way, and you spent time with it, looking at some of the nitty-gritty features of the text, okay, in such a way that you might have the foundation for like a sermon or a Bible study or a lesson for a youth group, adult education, something like that. So you've spent some time with this. It's not a technical assignment. The grading is based solely on effort and sincere, in-depth interaction with the text. I'm going to give you a check, whatever. I'm going to give you an A+, a B+, or a fail. It's going to be very basic, and I am not going to spend a ton of time on these. So do not stress about it. If you have questions, please let me know, and I will be happy to work through those or answer those. Otherwise, I hope this is a good experience. This is a good experience, good exercise in doing exegesis, in doing the kind of work that's necessary for you to be an informed reader and someone who can open up those vistas of meaning, of potential meaning, for a text, in a way that invites others into this creative process.